Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming on a public holiday. My name is Jeremy. So I'm leading these sessions this month. 5 sessions we've got. So I think many of you have been to these sessions before, but what we do is some meditation and some discussion about Buddhist ideas and practices, and the idea is just to introduce them, and then if you find them helpful, then that's great, and if you don't, then that's fine. You can just ignore them. So there's no pressure on you to accept these ideas, and also you're invited, encouraged by the Buddha to challenge his ideas. So the Buddha was very clear on that point. So we often have good discussions. So feel free to raise questions or objections as I go along. If you disagree with anything I say, that's fine. That's good. So we'll start off by doing some meditation. So what is meditation? Meditation is defined as familiarizing your mind with a peaceful or positive mental object, something that makes your mind peaceful and has the effect of counteracting what's called afflictive mental states, things that bother our mind. So that's what we're trying to do when we meditate, focus on a positive mental object, and by doing that, we're familiarizing our mind with it. So the first part of the meditation is what we call like setting the motivation, thinking about why we are doing this. So that's an important part of meditation, is to firstly think about why am I doing this, and then to generate as positive motivation as possible. So in particular, thinking about how you're wanting to overcome afflictive states, mental states, and pacify your mind so that you're, as well as making your own mind peaceful, also more beneficial to others, to help others, and at least not harming others. And then after that, we'll do some concentration meditation. So that is just focusing your mind on one object without letting it wander. And to develop concentration, we use 2 mental tools, which are mindfulness, which means remembering the object, and introspection, which means observing your mind to see whether it's wandered off or not. And then we'll do meditation, as we did last week, which is called meditation on the conventional nature of the mind. So, as I said last week, we used the analogy of the clear sky with the clouds. So the mind is, in that analogy, the conventional nature of the mind is said to be like the clear sky, and the clouds passing through it are like the thoughts or the mental objects passing through. And so we're focusing just on the cloud part of the mind. So anyway, we'll try that, and if you have questions afterwards, we can discuss it more, see how you go with that. Okay, so firstly, just sit in a posture that you find conducive to concentration. So for most people, that means having your back straight so you don't get sleepy, to keep your mind alert. And then relaxing the rest of your body, so you're not holding any tension. And then letting go of all of the things that are going on in your life that you're normally thinking about. So just deciding to take a break from thinking about those things for a few minutes. Give your mind a rest from that. And then bring your attention just to your breath, moving in and out. So think about your motivation. Why am I doing this meditation? So as I said, we're trying to familiarize our mind with a positive mental state. So that also means that we're defamiliarizing our mind with negative or disturbing mental states. So we're doing this to make our minds more peaceful and calm, and also useful for ourselves and also for the people around us who we share our life with. So you make the motivation as expansive as possible by thinking, by doing this, I want to be able to benefit as many other beings as possible, not just myself, but as many others as possible, including humans and animals. So you make that aspiration. Okay, so then bring your focus just to your breath, moving in and out. So mindfulness is remembering the object, in this case the breath, keeping it in mind. And then introspection is observing whether your mind has wandered or whether it's remaining focused on the object, the chosen object. So it can be helpful just to focus on the point under the tip of your nose, on the sensation of the breath moving past that point. And we're sort of gently resting the attention there. It doesn't require a lot of force. And if you like, you can count your breaths. So start with 1, and then breathing in and out is 1 breath. And then 2, and then keep counting, which can help you to keep track and notice when your mind wanders. If you completely lose count, then just go back to 1 and start again. Okay, so now that we have developed some concentration, we can use that to focus on the conventional nature of the mind. So this is defined as clear and knowing. So as I said, we think of it, the mind, as being like the sky. So visualize your mind as being clear and vast and expansive, like the sky. And then any mental objects that arise or appear in your mind, thoughts or sounds, sensations, memories, worries, things that arise in your mind, you think of them as being like the clouds that arise in the sky. So they arise due to certain causes and conditions, and they stay for a while and then they dissipate, dissolve. So our thoughts are also like that. But we're focusing in this meditation on the sky part of the mind, so the clear, defined as clear and knowing. So clear in that it's unobstructed. So thoughts can arise in the mind because of this clear nature. And knowing means that the mental objects that appear to our mind, we can know them, as in we have knowledge of them, we're aware of them. So that's the other aspect, clear and knowing. So in this meditation, we're just focusing on that fundamental clear and knowing nature of the mind, just observing that, being aware of that. So rather than focusing on the breath, the object of focus is that clear and knowing nature of the mind. So here also we're using mindfulness to remember the object, clear and knowing nature of the mind, and introspection to observe when our mind wanders off, to focus on other things. So when it does, we just bring it back to that chosen object of focus. So the feeling of focusing on this clear and knowing nature of the mind is a feeling of expansiveness and clarity and lightness. And it's like a purity, so it doesn't have any negative qualities. It's also very peaceful and still. So just spend a couple of minutes focusing your mind solely on this clear and knowing nature. Just resting your awareness on that. Okay, so when you're ready, just relax your concentration. Yes, question.
I got confused which part of the brain I have to concentrate. Is there a certain part that's better?
Yes, so I think it is a little confusing until we're familiar with that idea, because I think it's different to how we normally think of our mind. So I think if you return to that analogy of the sky and the clouds, so we're focusing on the clear sky part as opposed to the clouds part. So it's like this.
Brain? Because you didn't say brain.
I probably said mind rather than brain, I would say. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's still more here than there?
Well, I sort of think of it as being like the sky, so it's out there. So you think of your awareness as being as vast as the sky. So not necessarily related to your body, I would say. That's how I think of it. But I guess it's different for everybody. But so yeah, the idea that your mind is like this vast, expansive sky, limitless, and it has these things coming into it, ideas and thoughts and concepts. But you're in this meditation, you're just focusing on the awareness, the clarity. And so I think one of the benefits of that meditation, apart from generating concentration, it's also, I think we tend to focus a lot on the activities of the mind and identify with those. So we identify strongly with our various emotions and regard them as sort of that's who I am. I am. So might think I'm a very angry person, or I'm a anxious person, or I'm a this or that. But in this meditation, I think it's reminding us that those are just thoughts or ideas or mental habits that are arising in the mind, and there's more to a mind than just that. There's this sort of clear and knowing. So as I said, you're welcome to disagree with that presentation of the mind. If that doesn't make sense to you, then so do you agree that that there's a difference between the mind, the awareness, and the thoughts and the mental objects that are arising in your mind? Do you agree with that? So the fact that last week I was saying that describe those things arising in your mind as adventitious, meaning that they're not in the nature of the mind, and also that they're temporary. So we can see from our emotions that they arise for a while and then they really strong and then gradually dissipate. They have that nature, and sometimes they can feel like they arise from nowhere and very strongly, and then they can dissipate just as quickly. So that's the idea of them being adventitious, and also I think that reminds us that they're not sort of like who we are. They're just something that's arising because of certain circumstances or conditions, in the same way that a cloud or a storm cloud might arise and it can be turbulent for a while and then sort of gradually pacify. So even though they can be very strong and very persistent and hard to sort of be free from, I would say, but still I think we can still see that they are rising like stronger sometimes and less strong other times, like anger or attachment or anxiety. So that shows that they're not permanent, they're not there all the time. So they're not the nature of the mind. That's the idea. So I think it's a very like an optimistic view of who we are and what we are. So, as I was saying last week, the Buddha made this claim that our minds have sort of like infinite potential or vast potential. And so I think this meditation also reminds us of that. Again, you may not agree with that, but that's one idea presented in Buddhism and other, I think, spiritual traditions, that we have this sort of potential to develop our minds sort of, infinitely. But then, at least in the Buddhist presentation, what's stopping us from doing that is what's called these afflicted mental states or afflicted states of mind. So they're the ones that are bothering us, disturbing our mind, and causing us to feel, unhappy, and things like anger and attachment and anxiety and depression. And so we can see some are more obvious in the way that they bother us, and others are less obvious. I think we can all see how anxiety is uncomfortable, unpleasant, can be very painful. So that's fairly clear, and also depression. But others, I think it's not always clear how they're sort of disturbing our mind. So it's something that we can investigate through meditation. So, as I was saying, there's the Buddha is saying that we have this potential, but what's stopping us as these afflicted mental states, and that these afflicted mental states are arising due to we call it deceptive appearances or mistaken ideas, things appearing, in a mistake, we're not understanding how things exist, and then because of that, where these afflictive states of mind are arising. So that's, I think, also an encouraging idea. The Dalai Lama often makes the quote, makes the statement that these afflicted states of mind that arise, and even though they can seem very strong and hard to, sort of pacify, they're actually arising because of mistaken understanding of how things are. So in that way, they're actually quite vulnerable or weak. So they're fragile. We can undermine them by understanding how they're based on these mistaken ideas, and by identifying firstly the mistaken idea that they're arising based on, and then correcting that mistaken view. So that's the main sort of purpose of meditation, not just focusing your mind on a positive object, but also investigating what's happening in your mind, and particularly investigating the causes of these afflictive states of mind, like anger or attachment or anxiety, etc. So in that way, it's quite I would say like a scientific process, because you're investigating and you're sort of testing what's going on. So the first question then is, do our minds get deceived, or are we always correctly understanding the world as it is? So that's an interesting question. So I think from our experience, we can see that our minds do get tricked, and you can think of various experiences in your life where you thought things were a certain way, and then turns out that they're actually quite different, and then finding out about that can sometimes be a big shock. So as I was saying last week, you can see a lot of humour, for example, on social media. See a lot of humour in humorous situations where people are being tricked, either like pranked by their friends, or they're getting a fright by something that they thought was there but is actually not there. So that would be like a wrong assumption where you're thinking something is a certain way, but it's actually different to how it is. So your mind is making that assumption. I was thinking today about the example of until Copernicus, who was around in the 15th century, made this sort of prove that the Earth is not the centre of the universe. And prior to that, everyone sort of assumed that the world is, I'm not sure if everyone, but it did, but that was the general view, that the Earth was at the centre of the universe, and that the the sun and the moon were revolving around us. So that would be an interesting example of an assumption that everyone held, basic assumption, that you just assume that we're the centre and that the sun's moving past us. So it's interesting to think why did we make that assumption? That's sort of like assuming that we are the centre of the universe and things are revolving around us. That's sort of a human vanity that we assume that. So that's an interesting example. I'm not sure. Can you think of other examples? Anyone got a good example of where you've been deceived by something? It could be even like a sense perception. You know, sometimes we're deceived by our sense perceptions. Yes. Your mind was blown by pasta that wasn't with red sauce. I think I had a similar experience when I went to have dinner with my friend who was Italian, and they had pasta with no sauce, and that really blew my mind. They just put cheese on top. I didn't really know that was even a thing. Can you do that? Yeah. So yeah, it can be quite funny, you know. You see things where we've been tricked. But also can be, you know, very shocking, you know, where you thought, like, you know, you enter into a relationship with someone, for example, thinking that you know them, and then, you know, you find out that they're completely different to how you thought, and you've invested all this sort of energy into that person or that thing. So, one example, so we're talking particularly here about mistaken perceptions that arise from internal causes rather than, you know, from sense perceptions or from, you know, things that society has told us that are wrong. So in meditation we're focusing particularly on the internal incorrect appearances. So last week I was talking about exaggerated appearances. So with, let's say, aversion, aversion is like having a negative reaction to something, seeing it as a threat, or you know, when we're getting angry with someone, we're seeing them as negative or, you know, harmful or unpleasant. And so, from the Buddhist point of view, what we're doing there is we're exaggerating that negative quality in that person. Or when we feeling anxious, you know, we may be exaggerating the strength of a threat. So, for example, like with public speaking, you know, often people, you know, we find it quite nerve-wracking to give a public talk in front of a group, and you know, people can feel very anxious and even like feel nauseous and you know, shake. But then you think about what the actual threat is. You know, what's the worst thing that could happen is that you sort of you know, you bomb and crash, and people walk out and you know, want to ask for their money back or whatever. But that's sort of like the worst case scenario. But it's the level of fear that we feel. Things like those sort of threats can be very exaggerated. What's another example? I was snorkeling in a rock pool today, and I was feeling quite scared about sharks, and then I was trying to tell myself that this is just kind of an exaggerated fear, because statistically speaking, the likelihood of shark attack is so infinitesimal, particularly in Victoria, I think, and I was quite close to the shore. And then you compare it to the likelihood of, you know, being killed in a car accident is hugely higher. And so that's sort of an irrational thought where my mind is exaggerating that fear. And whereas I never sort of feel fearful when I get into a car about, you know, being killed in a car accident. So that's an example of, you know, exaggerating the threat and feeling anxious about it. And then in the case of anger, So you might think of someone that, not even anger, even just like dislike towards a person. And so if you think of someone that you sort of dislike, like for example maybe a politician who you just feel aversion to whenever you see them or hear them, and so then you have to investigate, is this a correct understanding, appearance of how they're appearing to your mind, or is it incorrect? So the Buddha is saying if we're having strong feeling of aversion or hatred, then we need to investigate, because probably it's arising based on some misunderstanding of how they are. So I think, but they're a really awful person, like how can I possibly see them as anything but awful? And so then one way of looking at it is that not everyone in their life sees them as awful. So there would be people in their lives who like them, who think they're great. The thinking that they're awful is sort of based on the way that they're making us feel. So we might feel that they might sort of threaten us, or they represent something that we find unacceptable. So we're sort of projecting that quality of unpleasantness onto them based on how they're making us feel. And also when we analyze, we can see that people are a mixture of good and bad. So people do good things and also bad things. So when we're seeing someone as completely awful, we're tending to forget about any of the good qualities that they have. So it would be hard to find someone who's completely bad or destructive or hateful all the time. What do you think? Do you agree?
I think he probably has some trouble with that Donald Trump.
Is that who we're all thinking about? But there's a lot of people who think that he's great, aren't there? A lot of people think that he's great. So then you probably think that they're all deluded or they're being tricked or something. Yeah. Misguided, yeah.
False consciousness about living 20-foot frame.
Yeah. But then someone like that, there might be some very good things that they have done, maybe given a lot of money to someone who was sick or someone like something, I don't know. But it's possible, isn't it? So they could have done some very good things also. I would hope. Yeah, so that's what we have to check up. At least, that's the sort of challenge that the Buddha's presenting. That when we're having these strong feelings of aversion and hatred, that they're arising because we are sort of misunderstanding the nature or the reality of that person or that thing. So that's something we need to check up. So then I guess also from a Buddhist point of view, we have this idea of many lives, So in this case, we're just focusing on this present situation and on what he's doing right now. And so we don't know what he was like in the past. So there's a meditation that is done for developing compassion. It's called developing the mind of equanimity, and in that meditation you think of a friend and an enemy and a stranger, and you think in this life that person I'm labelling enemy because they've done harmful things to me and they represent something that I dislike. And then this friend over here is someone I label friend because they've helped me a lot and they have these very good qualities that I really admire, and I feel that they're deserving of the label, friend. And then there's a person in the middle who I don't really know and not really sure whether I like them or not, so call it a stranger. They're sort of neutral. And then you swap them around and you think, so in the past, this person I call friend could have been the one who did a lot of harm to me, and so I would have been labelling them enemy at that time based on, and then the stranger could have been someone who was very dear to me. So this idea of many lives. But if you don't believe in many lives, then you can, a similar example is thinking about how people, can change. So you might think for someone who, when you first met them, you found them very unpleasant, but then after a while you got to know them and they did something very kind to you, and you sort of reassess them and put them into the friend category and move them from the enemy category to the friend category. So you can see how these things are fluid, so the labels of friend and enemy and good and bad are sort of can change. They're based on the current situation and how that person is affecting you or how they're behaving at that time. And then also the other thing that we tend to forget is that that the way people behave is based on certain ideas and impulses and habits in their own mind, and they, in the same way as we are sort of driven by our impulses and afflictive states of mind, and we sometimes harm people through anger or through saying harsh words when we're frustrated. In the same way as we do that, then other people also do that. So it's like that they're sort of controlled or overtaken by these afflictive states of mind. So particularly people who are harming a lot of others and being, insensitive and not caring about the harm they're causing others. So at that point, their mind's sort of overtaken by that feeling of not caring and being caught up in their own, pride or their own delusions. So the idea of compassion is based on that. And then the flip side of that, so that's what we call aversion, and the flip side of that is attachment. So attachment is when we're exaggerating the good qualities of a person or a thing, and we're developing strong attachment to that person or that thing, like wanting to be close to them, wanting to possess them or possess that object. So attachment is defined as exaggerating the good qualities of a person or an object or even an activity, like gambling, for example. When people can get very attached to gambling, so that would be an activity. So exaggerating the qualities, the benefits or the good qualities of that thing, that object, activity, person, and then seeking to possess it, hold on to it, grasp it, own it, consume it. And again, the problem there, or the way that the mind is being deceived, is by exaggerating those good qualities and projecting those exaggerated qualities onto that thing or that person. So again, that's something that we need to check up. So you can think of a person, for example, who's completely infatuated or obsessed with another person, totally overwhelmed and obsessed, and you can sort of see how their mind is being sort of overwhelmed by that emotion at that time, and other people probably don't see their object of infatuation in the same light. So you can see that it's sort of a projection of their mind, and then sometimes that can be very painful for them. So if the person they're infatuated with doesn't feel the same way, and they're suffering a lot because from unrequited love, and that's a common problem that we humans have. So that's an example of attachment, where it's a strong appearance of seeing someone as more sort of perfect than they are. So of course all of us humans have imperfections. It's hard to find a perfect person. And then exaggerating those qualities and then seeking to sort of trying to hold on to that person or that thing. So it's the same with an object. It could be a house or a car, or what else? Cricket. People get obsessed by cricket. Seems particularly mad to me in the middle of summer, standing out in the heat. I've got a friend at work. So did you spend all day standing in the sun yesterday? It's half your weekend gone, standing in the heat, watching someone throw a ball. said, yeah, I did. I love it. So anyway, he's enjoying that. But then the question is whether it's becoming a problem for him. So he could be attached to an activity that's actually harming you or not. Probably it's not in his case. He loves it. So that's attachment. So again, that's a similar idea of exaggerating the qualities of something and then seeking to possess that thing. So one of the problems with attachment, it said it's harder to overcome attachment because it often appears as like pleasurable, whereas something like anger or anxiety, we can easily see that it's painful. I think it's easier to see that it's painful. Whereas attachment can appear as something very pleasant. And so it's, the analogy is used of like a insect attracted to a light or a candle, and being so attracted to that, which is a form of attachment, and then actually getting burnt by getting too close to it. And even though they get burnt, they still come back because of their strong attachment to that light. You see that happen with moths. So that's the idea of the mind being so overwhelmed by the attachment and the sort of beauty, mesmerizing beauty of the object, that it doesn't notice that we're actually suffering, causing its problems. So again, that's something to check up in our own mind, whether that's happening. So the problems with attachment are sort of categorized into the problems of wanting and not having, like that sort of unrequited love, or really wanting something that you can't possess. And then the problems of having, so even when you get the object, problems are things like it might not live up to your expectations, so you feel frustrated or disappointed. You might blame the person because they're not living up to your expectations and having anger towards them. Or if you're very possessive, you might constantly feel anxious or jealous, possessively holding on to a person or a thing, or even your child, not wanting your child to grow up and become independent because you're so attached to them being this cute small person. And so the problems of having, and then also like overconsumption, when we're over-consuming food, and also the resources of the world, damaging the environment because of overconsumption. And then the problem of losing, which is when we're strongly attached to something and we lose it, it's taken away from us, or we're separated from it. So then that's also painful, and can also lead to things like depression and anger and other afflictive states of mind because of that strong attachment. So I think these are like useful tools, useful analytical tools to think about. So when you have something in your mind which is disturbing you, to think about it in terms of attachment and aversion, because often there is that going on. If you're having a difficult relationship with someone, think about it in terms of attachment and aversion. And attachment can also be quite subtle, like attachment to a certain idea of yourself, which is sort of like pride. You have this idea of I'm like this, and then you invest in this sort of image of yourself. And then when something happens that disrupts that or undermines that, then we can become, upset or anxious. So you think of yourself, I'm a very nice person, and then someone comes along, attacks you and says, oh, you're so selfish and you're so hurtful, and then it's so shocking because we've invested in this idea of I'm this nice person and I'm trying really hard to be nice all the time, and someone's coming along and telling me that the opposite. It's so, the mind kind of freaks out because it's, sort of shocking. So you can see that also happening in our mind, I think, getting stuck on this sort of image of yourself, which is also a form of attachment. So everyone will see us differently, and we're changing every moment. So it's sort of mistaken to have this concrete, permanent idea of what I am, this image of yourself. And so that's attachment and aversion. So any questions about all that? I've talked quite a lot there. And there's both huge topics in Buddhist thought and Buddhist practice, but I think very useful the idea of attachment and aversion and how they arise based on exaggerated view of the object. Any thoughts, questions, disagreements, examples of where you've become a victim to attachment or aversion due to misleading appearances?
I find your point about the image, attaching to an image of oneself really interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, given that we all have different opinions about people and therefore a lot of people can see us quite differently,
Yeah.
what would be your advice for the Buddhist way about thinking about oneself? Would it be in a more neutral way,
Yeah.
having all that space for ourselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the whole idea of meditation is to try and align your way of thinking with reality, okay, and trying to get rid of anything that's not aligned with reality. So, like I was saying, you might have this view of sort of fixed view of yourself. Or I'm this really nice person, and I always do nice things, and and invest strongly in that sort of fixed view of yourself. I think we often do that, and we're kind of taught to do that in some ways. But then when you investigate, you see that there isn't any sort of fixed, nice person findable here. We're always a combination of many things. There's a lot going on in our mind. Sometimes we have anger arising, aversion arising, dislike towards a person. And sometimes, we are peaceful and kind, we have that as well. So I think the more realistic view would be that we are this sort of like a collection of many things, and we have this feeling of I, but it's based on this sort of collection of body and mind. And this is where the idea of impermanence is useful too. It's constantly changing, so there's no kind of fixed entity we can hold. I'm this really good person here, and as you say, then everyone else's perceptions are different too. So someone's going to meet you and instantly dislike you for whatever reason, something probably going on in their life, like road rage. They're suddenly furious with you, don't even know what you've done wrong, and they're shouting at you. So their perception of you is very different, and so I think that's probably the more realistic view. But also I think this view that we have this huge potential is also an interesting idea of thinking about what am I. I think that's, whether you believe that or not, that's something to think about. But I think we all agree that we have this ability for the mind to develop, so we're not sort of stuck in this situation, we have that potential. So that would be, I guess, the Buddhist explanation of what we are. We have this sort of infinite potential of mind, but we're sort of currently a bit limited by these reflective states of mind. But what we are is actually a combination of many sort of factors of body and mind, yeah. And not fixed, constantly changing, yeah. Yes?
Aversion and attachment. Is aversion another sort of attachment actually? It's just a negative attachment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's quite similar, definitely. And I think you can sort of get attached to a certain... Like you see people who are so invested in a sort of hatred. For example, racism, comes to mind, And they're sort of maybe taught from a young age that this group is bad and become very invested in that. And I feel like that's sort of like an attachment to an idea, attachment to a certain bias, and invested strongly in anyone who disagrees with them, they'll get really angry and, so quite similar, I think. And also habitual, I think you sort of get into a habit of... So sort of attached to a certain habitual way of thinking about certain things and investing in that habitual way of thinking, even though it can be completely wrong. Yeah. But they're defined differently in that one is exaggerating the good qualities and one is exaggerating the negative qualities, yeah. And one leads to aggression and harming and aversion, and one leads to wanting to get closer to the object of attachment, yeah. So the problems that arise from them are sort of different, quite different, yeah. Yeah.
So does that infer from that in the Buddhist way of thinking to be obviously beyond each of those, whether it's an inversion or an attraction, there's somewhere in that kind of middle ground, or is it just not to be ping-ponged around in your life by those, it's just having the awareness that that's what's going on with your mind.
Yeah.
Start to
Yeah. Well, I think we sort of have to start, where we are now. And so we are affected by attachment and aversion. We have to accept that. And like you say, just being aware of it would be the first step, just observing it. And also observing, being aware of the problems that arise so that we don't sort of encourage, we don't invest in the attachment. We're sort of aware that the attachment is causing us problems. So that not making it worse, yeah, not sort of encouraging it because you can see that it's causing you problems. And then eventually, yeah, as you say, they will have less effect on your mind because you can see, for example, that the negative qualities that you're seeing in that person is actually a projection of your mind. It's something projected by your mind onto that person, and same with the positive qualities. So then they become much less compelling or much less hold on your mind because you can see, okay, this is just something that's being projected by my mind and is not the reality of the situation. And then eventually, yeah, they become less and less impact on your mind. So it's said that the analogy of the Buddha is that if someone was attacking him with a knife on this side and washing his other side with, scented oil, that he would feel exactly the same to either person because he's developed this equanimity state of mind where he can see that they are both equal in the sense that that they're sentient beings who have the same kind of potential and equally deserving of compassion and love. So that's the sort of, I guess that's the ideal, but then we have to be sort of realistic about where we are now and how things affect our mind. And also not beating ourselves up when we do have aversion and attachment, just not feeling that we should be free of them instantly like the Buddha, sort of thinking, okay, this is attachment arising, and why is it arising, and what are the causes, and what are the problems, and sort of observing how it works and observing how it's causing problems and then sort of letting it go. Same with aversion and anger and Yeah, I think that's the idea. So when we say that we're taking things personally, a good example is like with that road rage, if someone drives past and shouts at you and you may not even know what you've done wrong. So it could have nothing to do with you at all. So it could be the same thing would have happened to someone else in your, happened to be sitting in that position on the road. So it really got nothing to do with you. It's all about what's going on in their mind at that time. So I think thinking of it like that. So then another example of someone who you do know, who you're close to, and then they attack you verbally, for example. But again, it's a lot to do with what's happening in their mind. So why is that their feeling of anger or frustration, or why are they saying those hurtful words to you? There's a whole lot of causes that are making them reach that moment where they want to lash out, But, is it? So the question is it an attack on you? Like, is it personally aimed at you? Or is it just sort of something that's arising in their mind due to causes and conditions? So then you think, well, what if I did do something wrong that hurt them? Like, what if I said something hurtful to them and they're just responding back to that? So then wouldn't that be fair that they're attacking me? And then wouldn't I be sort of deserving of that attack? So then it's the same thing, like whatever led to you saying that hurtful thing to them, your own frustration or your own, they didn't do what you wanted them to do or what they said they'd do, or you expected them to be different to how they are. And so the idea is that these things are just all arising, due to causes and conditions, like the clouds in the sky. And so to think that it's sort of them aiming harm at you is sort of forgetting that these things just sort of arise due to causes and conditions. It's sort of thinking, do you see what I mean by that? Yeah, sure. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely, yeah. So, and sometimes we might completely misinterpret what they said. They might have been being nice, and we actually thought they were being insulting, and then we got really upset. And then later on, we realised, or they explained to us, that's what they meant. They go, "Oh, okay, oops." But then, even if they did intend it to be hurtful, then you think about what. I always go back to like when I've done the same thing. What led to me doing that? Was it frustration or insensitivity or being so overwhelmed by my own problems that I sort of forgot about hurting them? Or so then it raises the question, like, are they to blame for that, or are they innocent? So that's an interesting question. Yeah, sure, yeah. So I guess you'd say from the Buddhist point of view, all beings are innocent in the sense that they didn't sort of choose to have these afflictive emotions. Like you didn't sort of start from life say, okay, I want to be an angry person who hurts people. It's sort of just something that has arisen in the mind due to causes and conditions. And also the idea that having a peaceful, kind mind is much easier, more pleasant and more happy experience. So the people who have that are actually much happier. So the people who are really angry and hateful, and they're actually suffering much more, and they don't have any friends, or not many friends. They're lonely. So that's the idea of compassion is based on those ideas. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully that's a bit clear, the idea of attachment and aversion and how they're arising based on exaggerated ideas. Something to think about. So have a think about it during the week and come back with some good examples, please, if you think of them. And have another discussion about this next week. Thank you. Thanks for your time.